Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and in today's build video, I'm putting together a Saber Toothed Tiger Skull. Now, this is the kind of project that I love putting out in the maker community because I think it has a ton of potential. You could easily use the skull as a helmet or for shoulder armor, or you could even just make one for decoration around your house. Now, this skull is made all out of my HD foam and foam clay, which you can find over at Blick Art Materials. And if you want to support me, you want to support the channel, by all means go through the links that are in the description section and pick yourself up some HD foam. And if you would like to make one of these, I of course have free PDF files available over on my website that you can download and build right along with this video. And on top of the build video, I also have an extensive painting tutorial on this. So even if you're not making this specific skull, you could definitely use this painting tutorial for other projects in the future. So I want to show you what it takes to put this skull together. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start this build by using part A, which is going to make up the top of the skull. This piece is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. The big thing to note here is that the cut in the middle needs to be at an angle. That way the skull can slightly round over in the middle. Using a hobby blade, I'm also going to score about halfway down through the foam in the middle of the nose. To adhere the middle of the skull, I'm going to be using some Weldwood contact cement, and I'm also making sure to wear my respirator during this process. After the contact cement had been allowed to dry, the two halves can be firmly pressed together, and you can see how the angled cuts plus the dart give me the shape that I'm looking for. Part B is going to make up the front of the skull, and this piece is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. And just like the nose, I slice about halfway through the foam in the middle. Using some Bob Smith superglue, this piece can then be adhered to the backside of part A. To make up the side of the skull, part C is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam 2 times. I do use a little bit of heat from the heat gun to help manipulate the shape. Then using some more adhesive, this piece could be glued to the backside of part B. Part D is going to make up a layered continuation of the upper jaw. This section is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. And notice how I round over part C while gluing it into place so I get the desired curve. I also trace some lines and slice the foam at the top of the nose. These cuts in the material will help the top of the skull curve towards the back. I remove a little bit of material from the triangular sections on the front of part A. This will help them lay better when glued down to part C. And the triangular points are lined up with the eventual holes that I'll be putting into part C. By pulling the foam down like this, it's going to help round over the front of the skull. Part E is going to be an additional supportive section that is traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Now on a saber-toothed skull, this piece actually does not exist, but I'm adding it here for support, and in the end it's going to be painted a completely different color other than the bone, so that it looks like an addition to this piece. And of course, you don't have to add this to the build if you don't want to. To make the front of the skull curve to the correct shape, a small block of foam is going to be glued to the back side. This is going to be made up of part F, and it's going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. To start bulking up the sections that will attach the teeth, part G is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. These sections are going to be glued into place on either side of the skull. Additional material can be removed now, or you can just wait for the sanding process. To make up the correct thickness of the teeth, I'm going to be stacking 2 pieces of 10mm foam together. Part H can then be traced onto the stacked foam and cut out. When you're gluing the teeth into place, be sure to take your time and make sure that they are front facing. Also in the video, you can see that there's a little bit of an overhang, which is fine. It's going to be covered up with a little bit of additional 6mm foam and made up of part I. In my experience, it's easier to stack foam and sand it down to shape, rather than making a bunch of complex compound curves. I did go back and remove a little bit of the foam to put a more dramatic curve of where parts C and D are glued together. I added a build-out block to the back side of the skull using part J and some 10mm foam. Part K is going to attach to this and make up the nasal cavity. I also added a small strip to this using part L as a detail down the middle. After all these pieces have been glued to the back side of the skull, it gives a really cool look and it adds more dimension to the piece. I then took the skull over to my sanding station where I'm going to do a bunch of refining. I start off with somewhat of an aggressive sanding drum to remove as much material as possible. I'll then switch over to a smooth sanding drum to help refine the shapes, as well as to round over the edges by slightly cauterizing them. If you have not watched my video on how I customize my own sanding drums, I highly recommend it. With a good chunk of the skull sanded, I can now start to add some additional details, like the teeth that go in the front, and these are going to be made up of part M. I don't need anything too thick, so some 6mm foam is fine for this application. A heat tool is going to be used to help remove some of the material for each tooth, as well as to create the holes on either side of the skull. Using a hobby blade, I could then cut a notch out of the top of each one of these teeth and then glue them into place. I did take the rotary tool and sand down the tops to make them more flush with the front. Part N will make up the teeth at the back of the jaw. This template is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. Basic cuts can be made with a hobby blade, but then I did a lot of the refining using my rotary tool. For better definition of the teeth, the front tooth is removed, resanded, and then glued back to the front. This restacked piece could then be glued to the underside of part C. Part O will make up a section that will bulk out the interior of the eye socket. This is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. I go ahead and round this piece over using a stone bit, and while I have it out, I go ahead and add some deeper striations to the nose and teeth. Part P will make up a ridge that will flare out above the eye socket. This is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. You could remove some of this material beforehand, but I find it's just easier to glue the piece in place and then use your rotary tool once it's attached. And one thing to note, just like all the other bone projects that I've done, the sanding process is more dramatic than necessary, because I'm still going to be taking some foam clay to smooth the transitions between the pieces and to build up in areas that I'd like to look more organic. When utilizing foam clay, the first thing you want to do is to wet the surface of the foam. This is what allows the foam clay to stick without adhesive. And you'll find out what works best for you, but it's always for me a back and forth between using my hands and tools to smooth out the clay. I also use the foam clay to bulk out the jawline and the teeth. If the teeth had just been made out of the foam clay, they could have been brittle and broken down the road, unless that type of distressing is what you're going for. But I think the material works great as an additive medium, transforming the flat surface of the foam with small imperfections. And just like the sanding process, I add more foam clay than necessary. And I do this for two reasons. Number one, I'm going to be sanding back the surface. And number two, the foam clay will shrink about 10%. So I never make the shape exactly what I'm going for. I always add more than necessary, and I'll remove it once it's dry. During this build-up process, I do have multiple references off-screen of actual saber-toothed skulls at museums. This always just gives me a good point of reference, and it's better than just trying to make it up out of my own head. It's also really impressive to see just the little nuances in each individual skull, and how those little details bring the skull to life. After I was done applying the clay, the skull was then left to dry overnight. After the foam clay had been allowed to dry, I could then start sanding by using a sanding sponge. From there, I switched over to a wire brush. This is going to help me get a bunch of little fine striations in the surface, as well as some pitting. The pitting happens by knocking the bristles of the wire brush into the foam clay, leaving a really authentic distressed look. This is the kind of weathering that looks great on the exposed edges, which is why I build up foam clay in these areas even if I've got the HD foam underneath. And like I had mentioned in the beginning, I love the versatility of these types of projects. The fact that you could add to it or take away, use it as a helmet, use it as shoulder armor. All of these options are on the table for makers to explore. With the fabrication of the build complete, I can now take the skull outside and apply a couple of light coats of Plasti Dip. And before I get too far, I forgot that I was going to add a couple of resin cast rivets to the back of the skull. I've got tons of these little bits that I cast up years ago, and they work great as little details that I can add to props and costumes. After the Plasti Dip had been allowed to dry, I then applied a light dusting of Krylon Red Oxide Primer. Then I could add some Krylon Camouflage Tan on top, and if you notice I'm not adding it thick, just enough so it doesn't crack. Now I've done several bleached bone paint jobs in the past. For this skull I wanted to go darker, kind of like what you see in museums nowadays. So my initial wash for this piece is going to be a mixture of Liquitex Heavy Body Burnt Sienna and Raw Umber. This will uniformly tint everything and it'll run down into the details, which will help when I dry brush later on. And you can see here that I've already got a really good base color. But to grime it up a little bit more, I'm going to be using some Dirty Down aging spray. This particular color is dark brown, and notice that I'm applying it in more of the shadowed, recessed areas. Now because this is a water-soluble spray, I can reactivate all of the pigments using water. Then I can go in and scrub areas with a damp paper towel, and this is a unique look that I couldn't get any other way. From here I want to darken some of those shadowed areas even further, and I'm going to be using some Army Painter Strong Tone. Now this is a wash that I usually apply with a brush, but in this case I'm going to use my airbrush. This is going to be applied to the darkest areas of the skull, pretending as though there's a light source up above. And the thing that's nice about this with the aging spray is that the color values are very similar. They're all mixing in with that reddish hue that I used in the beginning. For my highlight dry brush, I'm going to be applying a mixture of Liquitex Heavy Body Yellow Oxide, Parchment, and Raw Sienna. This is going to be brushed onto the surface using a 1-inch mop brush and no water. I want to make sure that all those shadows I've applied stay where they need to. This is going to be applied to the highest points on the skull, still taking into consideration that light source from above. For my second pass of the highlight, I add just a little bit more parchment to the mixture. And if you accidentally get this any place you don't want, you can easily wipe it off with a wet brush before it dries. For the section at the back of the skull that's not bone, I'm going to be applying some Mars Black with a little bit of that highlight mixed in. I want this to look as though it could be like a darker leather that's affixed to the eye socket. I also forgot to move a little bit of the block on the back side just so it looks a little bit better as a helmet. This dark mixture was also applied to each one of the faux rivets using a detail brush. I'd like to add some custom wraps to the skull, and I'm going to use some jute twine, but it blends in too much, so I'm going to dye it by using some acrylics. So this is just going to be some Utrecht brand Crimson mixed with some water. The jute can then be dropped into the bucket and allow the acrylics to thoroughly saturate. Don't wring it out because you'll lose some of that color, just hang them up and allow them to dry. After a few hours, you've got a bright, vibrant thread that clashes really well with the bone textures. For this part, I didn't really have a plan here. I just started wrapping the thread around certain parts of the skull, and then when I was happy with it, I would tie it off and then super glue the knot. And of course, you could add as many or as few of these as you want, depending on the overall look that you decide to go for. I just thought that this kind of ritualistic binding would make it look really cool, and I could set it next to the deer skull that I had made years ago. And don't be worried, the strings on all these don't have to connect. I decided to just go through here and wrap them around areas I liked, and then cut it off and then glue it on the back side. For the back of the skull, I thought it'd look really cool to add some fur. I like the fact that all these different textures can be combined into one piece, making it more visually interesting. So after I'd cut the fur to size, I then removed material along the upper edge. With the top of the fur cut, I can now hot glue this into place using a SureBonder high temp glue gun. And I would recommend high temp for this application just because if you are going to use it on your body or on your head, your body heat can make some of the lower temp hot glues fail over time. To be able to strap this to the body or the head, I'm going to cut back part C and I'm going to insert a 2-inch metal ring. That way I could have leather straps that go side to side to use it for a headband, or I could have straps that go completely around the body and attach to the rings to use it for body armor. And these rings, they were part of a cheap curtain set that I was able to pick up at Lowe's. With the ring set, I would like to add some further decoration to these leather strips. So I'm going to use some wood beads that I picked up on Amazon a long time ago. These are actually from the same set that I had used on the deer skull mask. And again, this is all about adding the different textures to this piece. So we've got bone, we've got jute, we've got fur, we've got leather, now we've got wood. And of course, depending on what your character needs, you could add additional bones or feathers to your build. The fur does look good, but it's a little too clean, so I'm going to be using some Pro Acryl black primer to add a few tiger stripes to the fur. This primer was heavily diluted with some distilled water and sprayed through my airbrush at about 20 psi. A little bit of primer was also used to help darken up some of the jute. And then I sprayed a matte fixative to lock it all into place. For my fake rivets on the back, I want them to also look like metal, so we're going to start with some heavy body Liquitex rich silver. Now I can't have them look too new, so some dirty down rust is brushed onto each piece, as well as the metal rings. Then I could go back and apply just a little bit of silver on top for that final glint. This build was a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to see what people do with it in the maker community. And remember, if you're building any of my builds or utilizing some HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKS Props on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best HD foam.